Warning. The following episode contains subject matter and scenes that some viewers may find upsetting, disturbing, or unnerving. Please note, viewer discretion is advised at all times. Sit back and enjoy.
The Bible states, "Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." But do you ever truly know your neighbor? Do you know, hand on heart, exactly what hides, lurking behind the closed doors of a stranger? This week we venture to the sleepy trail town of Plainfield, Wisconsin, where, innocent enough at face value, a whole lot of nothing tends to take place. The kind of neighborhood where you'd leave your doors unlocked and your windows wide open. Well, on the winter's evening of November 17th, 1957, Sheriff Arthur Schley was about to learn an awful lot more about exactly what happens behind closed doors. As he broke into a beat-up farmhouse and made his way through a maze of trash, the sheriff was greeted by the ghastly sight of the faces of 9 women, carefully preserved and mounted on the wall, like a bizarre collection displayed by a proud human hunter. Hanging up in a nearby closet was a shirt made of human skin. On the kitchen table was a soup bowl made from a human skull. The owner of this farmhouse had been using female body parts to fashion a series of ghoulish artifacts. It appears local handyman Mr. Edward Gein had some serious explaining to do.
Hello and welcome back to our Good Murderer podcast. I'm Tom Norris and I'm joined once again by Benny Carter.
Good to see you. Good to be back. Another week in Boston Sound.
It's always a pleasure to be in Boston Sound. He hasn't paid us money to advertise Boston Sound, but it's never sounded better than in
Boston
Sound. Dan, was that right?
Bang on, guys. Thank you.
Today's case, Ben, is an absolute ripper of a case.
A bone chiller.
It is. And before we get into it, actually, this case we're about to discuss inspired many horror film over its time.
Multiple horror films.
Are you into horror films?
Not massively. My brother's big on horror films.
He is.
Very big on horror films.
What horror film is it? What spooked you up the most?
Me?
Yeah, you. Let's talk about you for a minute.
Scariest? You know what did me actually, but no true horror fans found this scary, but I found it scary. The Strangers.
Okay, yeah. No, I hate the idea of people looking through windows.
Yes.
When you're not sure they're looking.
Baghead.
Baghead?
He's a bad boy. Bad boy, Baghead.
Baghead.
Bad Ed Gein. Baghead. What about you, Tom?
Yeah, thank you. So I found The Exorcist very scary. I watched it when I was very young. And I remember we watched it at a sleepover and we actually watched it on mute because the voice was very terrifying. And the bit when she goes down the stairs.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, horrible, horrible, horrible. But this case has nothing to do with any of that. Before we start, guys, don't forget to give us a follow on our socials and don't forget to subscribe to either the audio or the YouTube.
For the audio people, pretty much everything is at Could Murder a Pod.
Yeah.
And for the people that can see it, you can see it.
So there's no excuses whatsoever. But today's case, Ben, is a case about Edward Theodore Gein.
Yeah, now there's 3 different camps here, the Gein, Gein, and Gain. Gein, Gein, Gain.
Yeah, like a bell. I'm going to go with Gein still, even though we heard it's Gein.
And Gein and everything.
Dan, you said it's...
I would say Gein.
Like Stein, but...
Yeah.
Edward Gein, Ed Gein. I said it to a few people before we did the case and no one corrected me. And
Weinstein.
Let's not bring
Ed Gein.
Let's not bring Weinstein. But yes, well, we're going to say, we'll maybe just call him Ed.
Ed works for me.
Ed is easier.
Ed and Eddie. Ed, Dead.
Just call him Ed.
Deddy. We'll go with Ed, probably.
Yeah.
Probably Ed.
Yeah. Okay, so as always, we like to look at the childhood, the history of our cases, and Ed's history is, well, I mean, it is absolutely I don't know what the word. Disturbing.
Disturbing, unnerving. It's wrong.
It's wrong.
It's wrong. There's so much wrong that happened in his. It's wrong.
It's wrong.
But it's a very turbulent upbringing and quite an isolated one at the same time. Eerily similar to kind of last week's episode.
Yeah. There's the term that's thrown around nowadays of being a mama's boy.
Oh, mama's boy.
I'll say Ed is the absolute
Poster boy.
Yeah, poster boy for mama's boys.
Mama boy, poster boy.
So Ed was also known as the Butcher of Plainfield.
Or the Plainfield Ghoul.
Ghoul. I did like the word ghoul.
Yeah.
The Butcher obviously is giving you a little clue about the kind of things he'd like to get up to. So let's look at his childhood, shall we?
Okay, so Edward Theodore Gein was born on August 27th, 1906. He was the second born son, so he had an older brother called Henry, to his parents George Gein and Augusta Gein. Now, they were some interesting characters right away.
Yeah, George Gein is a great name.
GG.
GG. Buffon. His father, yeah, I don't understand the dynamic between the father and the mother. To start off, his father was an alcoholic and struggled to hold down a job.
Not just any alcoholic, a timid alcoholic. Now, I don't know if that means he got drunk very easy or if he was just quite a quiet alcoholic.
I imagine it's timid just means shy.
That's what I thought, but I thought it was timid as describing his drinking stuff. Don't worry. That was just funny in my head.
Oh, was that? Okay.
It wasn't going to be funny.
Your note says, this is a smasher. Say this one.
Hit this out of the park, Ben. Don't get it wrong.
Did you get it wrong?
Ed's older brother, Henry.
The father being an alcoholic. His mother was a strict Lutheran and preached about morality.
Mm-hmm. She was very much the head of the family from what we can uncover.
Yeah, sounded like she wasn't too kind to his dad.
Well, she was frantically religious, so everything kind of God-fearing and by the book, very strict religious lady. But in terms of living with an alcoholic husband, that didn't bode well for the rest of the family. It was a very conflictual relationship between the two parents.
So he's very isolated. He lives in this farm with the mother. The mother turns away visitors. It's very, very isolated. His father struggling to hold down a job. And I think the farm wasn't overly successful, wasn't making a whole lot of money either.
And a big part of the kind of household dynamic, the real reason that Ed's parents hadn't, called things quits was because they, had deeply fundamental religious beliefs wherein that, divorce is not, divorce is a sin and divorce is not something we would live by. So they stuck it out.
Yeah, and Ed's mother, she was very condemning of women. She would call them prostitutes and the instruments of the devil. And yeah, she'd basically just say women were there to tempt men and to corrupt men. I mean, ironically enough, she ends up being essentially what corrupts.
Yes, yeah. I mean, her face as well. So Augusta Gein, it's one of those the portraits, and it's one of those ones when I first saw it, I looked at it and I thought it was going to be one of those kind of jump scare things where all of a sudden the face changes. I was waiting for it to happen. I thought, is that an okay thing to say?
3 hours later, going, it's going to happen.
Yeah,
it's going to happen.
A real stretch, but it kind of Ed's upbringing kind of reminds me of the Waterboys' upbringing because. Kathy Bates.
Not because Kathy Bates. But
no,
but
but,
yeah,
I mean, the character that Kathy Bates portrayed.
Yeah.
Everything was the devil.
Why not, Mama?
Because little girls are the devil.
The devil. Yeah, that's fine. I like that.
So,
that works.
and that, I mean, in the end, the Waterboy chose a different path to Ed Gein.
Yeah, it's not. The Waterboy is not based on Ed Gein.
No. Well, thank you, but
the Waterboy. Basically,
let's keep this going.
He gives water to the football players, ends up playing football, great player.
Yeah.
Ed Gein, very different.
He uses the kind of...
Don't look at that.
The Waterboy kind of uses all the negativity in his life as fuel, tackling fuel, to become a great...
Don't ruin the Waterboy.
Okay.
Anyway, enough about Adam Sandler films. So yes, Ed wasn't allowed to see other people, wasn't really allowed to have any friends. When he was at home, he'd spend time with his mother or trying to help out on the failing farm.
Like Bobby Boucher.
I said enough on Adam Sandler films. Although not pronounced, Ed had a lesion on his tongue which caused him to have a mild speech defect as well as a slight stammer. So yes, Bobby Boucher had a slight stammer.
Mama said, my mama said.
Can we please move on from Adam Sandler's film The Waterboy? Jeez Louise. Although his mother was very controlling, they did attend a normal school. But yeah, even Ed didn't really make friends because, his mother very much said not to. And if he did try and bring anyone home or anything, there'll be punishments for when he tried to make friends.
Yeah, essentially she was trying to prevent both of her boys from any influence of the outside world. Augusta would reserve time every afternoon, normally when the rest of the neighborhood, or the rest of the town were, socializing, she would reserve time to read to her two boys. So Augusta would usually select particularly graphic verses from the Old Testament to read to Henry and Ed, specifically ones dealing with death, murder, and divine retribution.
We're doing a lot of bashing of Ed's mum here, but also his dad was not completely innocent. Ed claimed that his alcoholic father would regularly beat him about the head so hard that his ears would ring. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it just basically sounds like a place where you wouldn't want to be spending your time. And also, it was very, as we said, very isolated. He wasn't able to have friends with other children. He would be there with his brother. He'd be spending time with his mum, learning all these horrible, scary stories from the Bible, and then having a dad who, would be physically abusive.
Yeah, didn't have the best kind of work ethic either. The father, he worked between different odd jobs. The farm obviously wasn't making money. Augusta had purchased a grocery store and kind of tended to that when she wasn't with raising the family and working as a kind of homemaker. But she would then go on to sell that about 10 years after purchasing it.
So a little bit on Ed's school life. He did, as we said, he struggled to socialise at school. But he did all right at school. He had a very average IQ. I think watching some of these documentaries, they tried to insinuate he was quite a simple man. But yeah. I think he was very, very average with his studies. He didn't excel, but he wasn't lacking far behind from other people.
A lot of the documentaries were fairly harsh on his appearance as well, which I thought.
What do you think?
I thought was a bit harsh. Kept going on about his droopy eye and his slack jaw.
Like Bobby Wish.
I don't follow. I'm joking. I follow.
Also, at school, he would burst out laughing at presumably his own jokes in his head, which apparently is a clear sign of schizophrenia, which means he suffered from this condition since childhood, and it was left untreated his entire life.
Wow. He would also be bullied for being shy and being quiet and being small. He also got continually bullied for having a lazy eye. So again, it wasn't just the documentary makers having to go, it was his schoolyard playmates at the same time.
Well, not playmates really, are they?
No.
And that's the thing. So as we know, his mother forbade him to date girls, but once she actually caught Ed masturbating in the bath, and to punish him, she grabbed his genitals, squeezed them, and called them the curse of a man.
That's enough to put you off.
The curse of a man. She kicked me in the curse of a man. Right in the curse of a man. They all work. Unlike Ed's dad. So
So Ed was around 8. And his mum had gone into the barn with George and forbid Ed from going into the barn and stay in the house. Ed disobeyed his mother and walked into the barn. And as he walked in, he sneaked into the barn and found Augusta and George with a pig carcass hanging upside down. As he was watching, his mother, Augusta, sliced the pig down the center, which released its intestines. Ed reportedly experienced sexual pleasure. And this is at age 8.
Throughout all this as well, his brother, very much, he was isolated as well. He wasn't making friends, but he was fairly unremarkable. There wasn't anything really happening with his brother. I think his brother had slight dreams of leaving the farm. He didn't want to stay there, where Ed was very happy and content with remaining there.
Well, Ed was kind of spellbound by his mother and absolutely doted on her, whereas Henry was a bit more kind of, he didn't share that same kind of warmth towards his mother, so he wanted out. Ed, on the other hand, wanted everything but that.
Yeah, so Ed would leave school at 12. He wouldn't go on to any further education. He'd just be working on the farm along with his alcoholic dad and doting on his mother. So from the age of 12 onward for his teenage years, not a lot happened really in Ed's life. It was still the same. His mother's relationship to them was still very much the same. They're the children of the house. She'll still treat them that way, not be happy with them making friends, bringing anyone back. They were all still very isolated on this farm.
So both brothers go about their ways now. Henry, the older brother, is gradually falling out of love with the Plainfield kind of lifestyle there and living under his mother's roof and rule. He's constantly at odds with her beliefs and starting to kind of...
Yeah, because Plainfield, Wisconsin, it was, at the time, it was only 700 people lived there. A lot of people in small towns like that will want to go and experience the big city or experience a different lifestyle. And I think, he was falling more and more out of love with this way of life.
So both the Gein brothers began to work odd jobs to help with their expenses. They both kind of worked as handymen throughout the town. They both had a really good reputation as well with the other people in the town as being, reliable and considerate people.
Yeah, they're both very hard workers. In one of the documentaries about it, there was a townsman who said if you paid him $1, he'd give you $1.50 work, just to show how hardworking he was.
Good return.
And everyone would trust him, and they'd know, if you get him in, he will do it. I mean, growing up on a farm, I guess there's a lot of bodge job fixing things and the big
grafters.
Yeah, exactly. So I think they're just very good with their hands, which, yeah.
Yikes. But on the note of trust, obviously Ed was very well trusted in the community. He actually went on to do a lot of babysitting. But Ed would regularly babysit for different families in the town. And he would pick up a really good reputation again as being an extremely good babysitter. Apparently, he could relate better to children than he could adults, and loved working as a babysitter.
Yeah, and as we said, it wasn't a case of he could relate better because he was dumb. I think as well, growing up not allowed to have friends, maybe this was the release for him to actually, play games and do things he never could do as a child.
And as we said, Henry again began to, reject the ideas and views of his mother. He would frequently talk ill of her in front of Ed, which Ed absolutely hated and was infuriated by, which, gradually created more conflict between the two brothers as well.
Yeah, and Henry would also talk to other people about how he kind of found Ed's attachment to his mum slightly unnerving as well, and Ed overheard him speaking about that. So these kind of things obviously dividing the brothers. So when Ed was 34, his father died of heart failure caused by alcoholism. I think it doesn't seem that Ed was too torn up by the loss of his father.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, this brought him closer to his mother. Henry's slightly more distant now, but his mother really then takes takes on the role fully now as the head of the house.
Yeah, as you said, the marriage wasn't too great between the two anyway, so it might have even eased the kind of sense of the mood of the house. But it was the perfect breeding ground, this isolation, this kind of staunch, religious thoughts, alcoholism, the perfect breeding ground for someone to, develop mental difficulties and struggle with mental health. As we said, it's believed that he had schizophrenia as well. So all these things mixed together is a perfect breeding ground for confusion. And also, as we said, he wasn't allowed to have girlfriends or any kind of thing, all women were the devil, apparently. So it would really kind of take a toll on his mental well-being.
And I think you'd get good odds on Augusta saying something at the time of the George passing away that, this is what happens if you drink alcohol. Look at what's happened to your father. You boys stay away from alcohol, using that as another way to reinforce her beliefs. I think you'd get some good money on those odds.
So as we said, Ed and his brother's relationship wasn't overly peachy.
No, it was becoming more and more fractured, more and more fractured as the days and weeks and years go on. And actually, a mere 4 years after George Gein passing, there was a bit of an event at the Gein farm.
We're about to dip into the timeline now, but before we start, I was going to say a lot of these points in documentaries, they suggest they've happened, or it was said that this could have happened. So some of the points, we are going off that. I think some things have been embellished over the time because with Ed Gein comes a lot of these horror films and horror stories, and a lot of films about it. But we'll make that very clear.
Okay, so May 16th, 1944. So this is just 4 years after George Gein, Ed's father, passed away. Ed and Henry start an intentional brush fire to clear some marshland on their property, but the fire blazed out of control. They separated in order to contain the combustion, but afterwards Henry failed to return to the house. Ed asked some men to help search for his brother, but they were unsuccessful. However, later that day, Ed was able to lead a secondary search party headed by Sheriff Engel directly to where Henry's body lay. And that's kind of the weird part here. The second attempt, Ed found it straight away and led them straight there.
Yeah.
Upon finding Henry's body, they noticed that his body was blackened with soot, but completely unburned, and he was face down. Although the sheriff noticed bruising around Henry's head, the coroner declared asphyxiation as the cause of death, and no further investigation was pursued.
So as we said there, it's very questionable, the fact that they didn't pursue that, the way the body's laying, and no burn marks. And obviously this is something, it's not the first time they've done, this kind of thing. Obviously you can have accidents on a farm, but
It was kind of argued both ways, wasn't it? Because he could have inhaled a large amount of smoke and then fallen and bumped the head, or bumped to the back of the head, maybe from old Ed.
Well, like we said, Ed Ed had heard him speaking ill of their mother.
Yeah.
Ed had heard him speaking ill of him, and how much he was, how much he loved his mother. So this could be all a ploy for Ed to have his mum all to himself, and be able to, it's just him and her.
Henry out of the picture.
Exactly.
Who knows? So there was never an official outcome of this, and no further investigation was pursued.
Yeah, some people think that they thought, they've lost their father 4 years ago. Now they've lost their brother. We can't put them. We can't put them through that. But it's.
Yeah, you almost imagine the police turning up and go, "Oh, is that Ed? Is that Ed's brother, the one that's always with his mum? Oh yeah, don't worry about him. They'll be all right." Yeah,
and as we said before, Ed's reputation around the place was he was a very gentle guy. He was very kind. He was very hardworking. So the thought that he could do this would go.
Yeah, but also they had that view that he was simple and wouldn't hurt a fly. So they kind of overlooked those facts, I guess.
Yeah. So a year later, on December 29th, 1945, aged 67, Augusta Gein finally died from a stroke. Ed, then 39, boarded up her bedroom and sitting rooms as museums and buried her with a headstone engraved mother. He kept those rooms pristine comparatively to the rest of the house.
Yeah, and I think she had first had a stroke shortly after Henry passed away, so she was battling illness for a while then, and he absolutely loved caring for her, working as a carer.
Yeah, so after her initial stroke, she was not as mobile as before, and so Ed had to literally do everything for her, which he really
enjoyed.
Yeah, that was his
He really enjoyed.
I mean, that's what his dream was have his mother all to himself, and she relied on him now. It's a complete reversal.
Yeah.
But now Ed Gein is alone. He is totally lost without Augusta. He closes off every part of the house apart from the kitchen and a small side room where he also sleeps. He now takes up a huge interest in true crime magazines, becoming fascinated by Nazi war atrocities. Gein was alone for the first time in his life, and he began a descent into madness, turning his mother's once pristine house into a museum of death. His neighbours began to report that Gein smelled bad and that his appearance when turning up to odd jobs had deteriorated. I guess you'd say, he'd lost... Everyone he'd known how much he loved his mother, and he's had a hard time of it. In 5 years, he's lost his brother, mum, and dad.
Yeah. Yeah, he's lost his whole family.
Yeah. So, if someone's turning up and they're looking a bit worse for wear, you're not
going to turn him away. Go on, Ed. Carry on.
Fix the door, Ed. You stink. So do it from the outside. Thank you, Ed. Okay, I've given you $1, and you've given me $1.50 worth of work, Ed. Thank you very much indeed.
So the timeline starts to get a little bit heavier here, so we're going to go over a 6-year period, but from 1946 to 1952. So 18 months after his mother's death, an intensely lonely Gein spends a lot of time, mostly overnight as well, visiting the Plainfield Cemetery, where he visits his mother, brother and father's graves, but he also goes to nearby burial grounds overnight as well. And he starts making these trips with a pry bar.
Yes.
You can probably guess where this is going.
Can we? Yes, I know. But do they, Ben?
Do they? Let's find out.
Do you then?
Ed decides to dig up his mother and remove her head.
Yes, which he took home to shrink, just as he read about in his books.
So he's obviously picked up a bit of a fascination with true crime, gone through those magazines back to back, cover to cover.
Head shrinking, though, I wouldn't have thought would be a big topic in those books.
But true crime in the kind of early 1900s, that is a stretch.
I guess in that kind of time, what they called then freak shows and sideshows, shrunken heads and things like that were a big fascinating thing. It was a bit of the macabre.
Yes, yeah. Well, that was apparently Ed's intention in any case, so he breaks into his mother's grave, removes the head for the purposes of shrinking, takes the head home.
On that matter, because he was at this time still babysitting and whatnot, and there was reports from the kids saying to their parents that around Ed's house they saw a shrunken head and stuff.
Yeah.
But they wouldn't believe him because that is a crazy thing to say.
Crazy thing to say, crazier thing to do.
Very small-minded of the parents. Smaller minded than the shrunken head, I'd say, Ben.
Excellent.
Cheers, Dan.
After this,
Honey, I Shrunk the Brain. No, that's right.
After this, Gein began scouting recent obituaries.
Scouting for graves.
She's so ugly.
Ugly.
Because she's dead.
Oh. A rotten joke.
Rotten corpse.
That's literally why I said rotten joke.
That's good. That was excellent again.
Thank you.
Dan. So basically after this, not only has he removed his mother's head from her body and taken it home, he begins scouting other local obituaries for people that have passed away of a similar age and appearance to his mother.
Yeah, he'd be looking at the obituaries like an Argos catalogue.
Essentially, yes. So over the course of the next 6 years, Gein would make over 40 visits to 3 separate graveyards where he would mostly dig up the bodies of women he thought resembled his dead mother. He then took the corpses home where he mutilated their bodies into trophies he displayed among his house. A few of these trophies, and we will go on to cover the full list, included a corset made from a torso. A torset?
That kind of works.
It kind of works.
Excellent.
He had also fashioned a pair of lips as a window shade drawstring.
Yes, I mean, over this time, obviously it says here as 40 visits, they were never able to prove how many times he went to these places. I mean, Ed said when he would go to these places, he'd often go there in a trance. He wouldn't know what he was doing. And when he would kind of come to realization what he was doing, he would stop immediately and go home. That's what he would say later on. Yeah. He would say that it was all kind of in hysteria, him doing this. But he, over this time, he would really, as he said, he was very handy, but he was able to sew, he was able to butcher, he was all these things that he was naturally able to do. He was kind of honing in on his craft here. And yeah, he was very much targeting a certain age range with a certain look.
Yeah, for reasons of which Tom is going to provide more detail on now.
In 1951, he reportedly began creating the woman suit, and by that I don't mean big shoulder pads. He began to create this so he could become his mother, they believe, or at least a female. So yeah, I mean, this, as we said earlier on, the story of Ed would inspire a lot of people to write horror about them. And this particular part here is Buffalo Bill from The Silence of the Lambs, Thomas Harris's novel.
That was the only film as a kid, or not as a kid, as a kid, my parents forbid me from watching that and 8mm.
I haven't seen it. 8mm.
I still haven't seen
sounds
it.
Sounds like one of your home movies. But yeah, with Buffalo Bill, there's a scene where he's killing these women of a certain size in order to make this suit. But yeah, Ed said that he was doing it because he wanted to become a female, but people believe it was because he wanted to become his mother.
Yeah.
Which is so creepy.
And it's not, when they say, a woman's suit, it's not just kind of, partly a suit. It's a full body outfit he's trying to form.
Yeah, imagine a scuba diver suit made out of skin.
Women's skin.
And Ed would later admit to dancing in the woman's suit in the cemetery of a full moon, which to me sounds like that's been embellished.
Yeah.
It's too perfect in sense of an eerie scene.
Yeah.
Him dancing in his woman's suit and it's too risky. I guess digging up a grave in any way, shape or form is risky.
Yes, but that's particularly risky. I mean, if he was to good stuff.
Do you reckon he'd wear a woman's suit and then wear clothing over it? Or is part of it being nude?
Gosh, I think part of it's... I don't know. That's...
Do you think Ed... Because obviously the first person he dug up and cut his head off was his mum.
Mother, yeah.
So do you think because he was later then honing his skills by digging up these other people... Because by this stage he hasn't killed anyone. Mm-hmm. It's all just people that were already dead. I'm not saying that makes it any better, because it's slightly better because he didn't kill them. But do you think... he regretted not having the skill set by the time his mum died because he wasn't able to immortalize her in his...
I mean, that's certainly... I mean, that was the inspiration then from Psycho.
Yeah.
So at this age as well, he's also still a virgin. He's been... I mean, in terms of how his formative years, he was kind of sexualized, and the treatment from his mother there, that's questionable.
Yeah, but she very much preached that this was all the devil, not to do anything.
So maybe he's kind of not rebelling, but...
It wasn't like it... Because, I mean, the clear comparison we can do here is Ed Kemper cutting his mum's head off.
Yeah.
But that was to spite her. This wasn't to shame his mother in any way.
Well, that's it. And Ed Kemper really did go on to
Yeah. Yeah. So it's
Is he in a weird way celebrating her life then, making this suit? I think, like you kind of asked that. So
well, we said it, the isolation, especially at this stage where he was by himself this whole time, and at that stage he was spending his time cutting up bodies, making lampshades out of people. You know, it was in his house by this stage as well had turned into an absolute
the
tip.
photos are.
It was like literally big fat flies flying around everywhere because there was all just guts and crap around the house. I mean, the bedroom of his mother was still immaculate, but everything else was an absolute
disarray.
It was absolute disarray. But yeah, it's a haunting idea. Dancing in the Moonlight, top loader.
Lovely, karaoke track.
Yes, I've sung that a few times.
Mm-hmm.
So following on from what Ben just said, he would later deny having sex with the bodies, saying he never had a sexual experience in his life except with himself.
And if he would already admit making the woman jacket, wearing it and dancing in the moonlight, I'm inclined to believe if he would admit that much, it's not as if he would say, oh, and then I had sex with them. Would make it, I mean, it would make it worse, but he's already in the deep end right now.
Yeah.
So
he's beyond the deep end. He's in the Marianas Trench.
And as we've discussed previously, that's deep.
That is very deep. Though we've said along this stage he hasn't committed any murders. He's literally dug up the bodies. But around this time, two hunters disappeared from a Plainfield bar in 1951, and no trace of them were ever found aside from a jacket found near the Gein property. A neighbour complained of a terrible smell coming from the Gein property, but it was not investigated. The thing about this is the only reason I could see him committing this crime and killing these hunters would have been because they stumbled upon...
If he was caught by them.
Yeah, because that doesn't fit his MO in any way, shape or form. He's not going to be cutting them up and making things.
He's not Ed gaining anything from the situation.
There you go.
Excellent.
That was using your head.
Fantastic.
Dan, that was using his head. Dan. But yes, I think he would only have committed that crime if
he was forced to.
Yeah.
By circumstance. But that was the thing, I think, around this kind of time, the early 50s, there were a few people that went missing, few bodies in the Plainfield area that kind of disappeared, and they couldn't prove it. But this is where, as Tom mentioned, there's a lot of conjecture attached to this particular case. I mean, later on in 1953, a 15-year-old girl, Evelyn Hartley, was abducted while babysitting in La Crosse, Wisconsin, leaving behind signs of a struggle at the house. Now, the children that she was babysitting were absolutely fine. They had been sleeping, but there were pry marks on the window. Pry mark. Can't make this up. Didn't Gein go in with a pry bar?
He did go in with a pry bar. But Gein was visiting a relative a few blocks from the house at the time, although he would later deny involvement and pass 2 lie detectors. Again, there's no reason for him to commit that crime other than she's taking up some of his babysitting.
Yes, she's on his territory.
Yeah, babysit club, get out of it. That's the only thing. There's no reason in
Highly
his...
competitive industry, though. So...
Yeah, I feel, well, as I said, like he's a fairly average. He's not the most intelligent, not the dumbest person. Past 2 lie detectors, I don't think he'd be cunning enough to know how to trick them. Yeah. So I think that one he's probably clear of.
Fine. Yeah.
So December 8th, 1954, Gein became transfixed with a voluptuous and bawdy bar owner who ran Mary's Tavern. So this woman was called Mary Hogan. She was 54. She somewhat resembled Ed's mother. She also used to swear like a sailor. And she had the nickname Bloody Mary for being crude, foul-mouthed, and a libertine.
Do you reckon she made a good Bloody Mary at the tavern?
Yeah, I'd like to think so with that name.
You'd have to back that up, I think.
In December 1954, Mary Hogan vanished from her establishment and police found blood on the tavern floor and an empty bullet casing.
The following day, while working on an odd job with another local man, Elmo Ueck, with whom he discussed the disappearance, Ed apparently said, "She's up at the house right now." While Gein was never tried for the murder of Mary Hogan, he did admit to the crime later in court. Ueck thought Gein was joking, but Mary's head would later be discovered in a paper bag at Gein's house. Gein later told police he had been hanging out at Mary's tavern, drinking with her until the bar closed. With no one else around, he pulled the blinds, put a .32 Mauser pistol to her forehead, shot her, placed her body in his Ford pickup truck, and took her home to defile her corpse.
So this is obviously him stepping up from grave digging and robbing and up to actual murder here. And this is the first one that he's actually admitted to. In terms of looks, they were quite similar to. She was quite similar to Ed's mum, but in terms of actual attitude and personality, she seemed to be the absolute polar.
They would not
opposite.
have got on.
No, but later on, Ed would say the only reason he would go on to commit any murders was if the ground was too hard to dig up. It was too. That's what he said.
They were long winters then. Plainfield. So on November 15th, 1957, this is over 3 years from the murder of Mary Hogan. So as far as Ed's concerned, he's got away with that one. He pops into Worden's hardware store, which is on Plainfield's Main Street, and he inquired about the cost of antifreeze from Bernice Worden, who run the store. Now, while Ed made this inquiry, her son, Frank Worden, who was also the local sheriff's deputy, was present. And they found he found Ed's interaction to be slightly strange. Nothing came of this, and Ed went about his day. But the encounter left Frank really confused, and actually his concerns were warranted, because the following day there'd be quite a grisly sight.
So on November 16th, Bernice failed to open the store, and Sheriff Schley found a blood on the floor, and a .22 caliber rifle was out of place on its rack in the store. And among the store receipts was one for a gallon of antifreeze from the last sale of the morning. And the name Ed Gein was actually on the receipt. So Sheriff Schley would inform her son about this, and then he put two and two together, and they went straight to Ed's house. But he wasn't home. It was the second day of deer hunting season, and the pair went away, but then returned for a second time to make a ghastly discovery. Ed's house was locked, but they made their way into the barn, and it was pitch black. They had a torch, they're looking around, and they actually bumped into something hanging from the ceiling. They'd move the torch around, and they would light up what would be Bernice Worden's body, split open like a deer. They actually believed that the body was actually of an animal at the time, because it was so, I guess it was just something that, you've never seen before, and they immediately assumed it was actually an animal. On closer inspection, they actually discovered it to be Bernice Worden.
So later the very same day, local police searched the house of Ed Gein, and they come across, even to this day, one of the most grisly discoveries, imaginable. So after discovering Worden, the sheriff's department searched Ed's house and found human bones and fragments, a wastebasket of human skin, skulls on his bedposts, human skin covering his chairs, masks created from human heads. The sheriffs found many other disturbing sights across his household. So searching the house, authorities found 4 noses, whole human bones and fragments, 9 masks of human skin, bowls made from human skulls, the skull bowls, 10 female heads with the tops sawed off.
You could make a horrible Days of Christmas.
Yes. I'd be surprised if that didn't already exist. If not,
4 noses.
1 skull bowl.
There you go.
And 9 vulvas in a shoebox. Human skin covering several chair seats. And there are photos of all of this. It's rank. Mary Hogan's head in a paper bag.
Yeah, so with this one, the policeman, the detective that found this particular bag, he looked in, he saw hair, and he said, he questioned it after he'd done it, but his natural instinct was to pick it up and look at it. So he pulled the head out, and he immediately saw the head, and obviously that was been haunting, but he was like, I don't know why, I felt the compulsion to grab it and pull it out. But yeah, I imagine that would be...
Maybe he thought it was an animal or something, I don't know.
Maybe hoped it was an animal.
Yeah. As well as Mary Hogan's head in a paper bag, they found Bernice Worden's head in a burlap sack, 9 vulvas in a shoebox, as I mentioned, skulls on his bedposts, organs in the refrigerator, a pair of lips on a drawstring for a window shade, a belt made from human female nipples, and a lampshade made from the skin of a human face.
So as we mentioned again, the horror films that this inspired, we've mentioned Psycho, we've mentioned Silence of the Lambs, and this one here is Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This is where they massively took inspiration. And they didn't say directly the character Leatherface was, in terms of character, was lifted from Ed, but the actual making things and sewing things together and all these things was definitely heavily inspired. So November 21st, 1957, Gein is arrested and tried. Gein would go on to tell officers how he visited several local cemeteries in a daze, like I mentioned earlier. He would say they would go there, and when he'd come to, he'd be like, oh, what am I doing? And they'd leave there. But and he'd also admit to, apparently, which I'm still very dubious on, dancing in the moonlight in a woman's suit. We've all been there, Ben. Yeah, and he would take bodies from these cemeteries and make ghastly paraphernalia with them, using castor oil to preserve the face masks.
So not only is he just kind of, he's thinking long term with this, he's taking care with everything that he's doing, and he's wanting to preserve these hideous kind of...
Well, it's like I'm collecting football cards at the moment. I put them in penny sleeves or in a bigger, thicker pack because I don't want them to lose value.
You don't want them to spoil.
Exactly. So it's exactly the same kind of principle.
It's identical.
It's not there. It's not identical. Thank you. So if Ed Gein's initial confession was actually ruled inadmissible, the Sheriff Schley was so angered and appalled by Gein's behaviour, he bashed his head into a brick wall during the questioning. The judge decided there was no way the confession can hold up given the excessive force used. And this sheriff would reportedly die due to trauma of his heart because of the things people said the things he saw had an everlasting effect on him.
I mean, of all the cases we've covered so far, in terms of a discovery, this Ed Gein's house and the different things he would have seen, experienced, smelt, that's up there. That's well and truly up there. Yeah,
I mean, it's reading some of these things like, they found bones and 10 severed heads, faces peeled off. Some of these faces he had drawn lipstick on. Ed said apparently when he wouldn't need the body parts, if he wasn't going to do anything with them, he sometimes would return them to the grave.
Oh, that's nice of him.
That's the thing. It seems so black and white with him. It doesn't seem... He seems as a normal thing. Well, I'm not using it, so of course, if I'm not going to use it, I'll bring it back.
I made a skin suit out of them, but I didn't f*** them.
That's a little clip there. The Plainfield community of just 700 people were deeply shocked, even though the soft-voiced, reclusive odd-job man had joked about a collection of shrunken heads, and local children thought his house was haunted. As I said, the children saying before they've been around there and they've seen shrunken heads and the parents weren't listening.
And Ed's at the bar, drinking a Bloody Marys, joking about shrunken heads. Well, he was telling the truth, Mary.
Do you think it was just the case if he would say these things and people would laugh and he'd be like...
Why are you laughing? Possibly. That's a very... possible.
Because I remember hearing reports that he would talk about these kind of things to the police as if it was the most normal thing you would do. The case would create a sensation that would spread from the US Midwest across the nation, inspiring a tourist industry of visitors to see the murder farm. So Ed was tried for first-degree murder, where he was found not guilty by reason of his insanity. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia, making him unfit for trial. Gein was sent to a state hospital for the criminally insane.
So March 20th, 1958, a year after Gein is arrested, Gein's house, now known as the Murder Farm, which was an 195-acre property, was appraised at $4,700, which is the equivalent in 2021 of $45,000, roughly $45,000. His possessions were scheduled to be auctioned on March 30th, 1958, amidst rumours that the house and the land it stood on might become a tourist attraction. So it attracted a lot of interesting buyers. Early on the morning of March 20th, the house was destroyed before it could be auctioned by a fire. Was it the ghost of Henry?
Could well have been.
Let's not rule it out.
I'm going to say it now. I don't think it was. I'm going to put my reputation on the line. Prove me wrong.
Yeah.
Prove me wrong.
So the house was burnt down. They investigated this and it looked suspicious from the off.
It felt like it was very loosely investigated, didn't it? It wasn't.
Yes,
yeah, and people didn't, because of what happened there, and the town was so sick of people, the kind of dark tourism of people wanting to go there, the film crews wanting to interview people. I think they kind of thought, this is burnt, this is done.
Yeah.
And they were happy about that.
And interestingly as well, they couldn't completely solve it, but when they informed Ed Gein that his house had burnt down, he simply shrugged and said, "Just as well."
You mentioned there that there was the auction, and one of the things they did auction off was Gein's car, and this was the one that he used to carry bodies from the cemetery at night, which was sold via public auction. So Carnival sideshow operator Bunny Gibbons purchased Gein's car for $760. He used this at his sideshows, charging Carnival guests 25 cents to see this car that got famous for all the wrong reasons.
Now, you can still see the car today, I believe. I believe it's in a museum.
So it's believed, and it was theorized afterwards, that Ed was suffering from the Oedipal complex, which drove him to commit these crimes after the loss of his mother. So this is a Sigmund Freud term, and it's the theory of a psychosexual stages of development to describe a child's feelings of desire for his or her opposite sex parent, and jealousy and anger towards his or her same sex parent.
Oh, okay. So that's the one when anyone that doesn't know everything about Freud hears about Freud and they go, "Oh yeah, Freud's the one that thinks."
Yeah.
You want to
Oedipus complex.
Yes.
That's their go-to, and I guess this is their prime example of it.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Is his fascination with his own mother. So Ed is in the secure hospital for 10 years, where the nurses there say he was an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, model
patient.
Model patient.
She was a model patient, and apparently really good sewer.
Yeah.
Which you can imagine he probably would be by this stage.
Yeah. Well, there's evidence to prove that.
Nylon is so much easier than women's skin. Ed, can you just get your sewing done, please? So 10 years later, Gein is determined fit to stand trial. In early 1968, that November, he was found guilty of the murder of Worden. However, he was also found insane at the time of the murder, and as such, he was recommitted to Central State Hospital. Maybe they'd had lots of sewing needing doing.
So throughout the remaining 60s and all of the 70s, apart from his attempt to petition for a release in 1974, which was rejected, the mild-mannered Gein made virtually no news while institutionalized. And as you said, the house has burnt down. Yes, the car has been sold to a kind of a sideshow and had its attractive years. But apart from that, he didn't make any further headlines. Yes, he was the inspiration for, 2 or 3 movies we talked about, and a few movies actually about Ed Gein specifically.
Yeah, the author Robert Bloch actually would visit Ed, and he went on to write Psycho, which is obviously very inspired by Ed Gein. And then
Norman Bates' character.
Yes, Norman Bates, and then the director Alfred Hitchcock will go on to make the film, which was a huge smash hit. So people were fascinated by Ed Gein and how he was, and looking at it again, there's the footage of him being arrested.
Yes.
I can completely understand how the town just didn't. He seems so unassuming. And even when he's arrested, he's got a bit of a wry smile. He doesn't look like a crazed.
He's cooperating. He seems mild-mannered.
Yeah. So yeah, he would go on to do his time in prison. Eventually dying of lung cancer, age 77, in the hospital. After his death, nurses would describe him as nice, docile, and extremely handy at sewing, as I said.
So a little bit of irony on his death. A few years after he was buried, his gravesite in the Plainfield Cemetery, which again, if you're going to bury him anyway, I appreciate he requested to be buried with his family. I don't know how they didn't see this coming. His gravesite was frequently vandalized over the years, with souvenir seekers chipping off pieces of his gravestone before the bulk of it was stolen in the year 2000.
Yeah, that was his dream, was return to his mother and being buried there. But the kind of thing which I think would have got to him a little bit was he was buried in the same plot as his brother. So,
yeah.
And he wanted his mum all to himself. But as you mentioned, people would chip off bits with the tombstone. Eventually someone nicked the whole thing.
Yeah, and they did later recover it the following year. So in June 2001, it was found near Seattle and is now in a museum where it has since remained. And
now Ed is left in an unmarked grave. And yeah, obviously his legend lives on in horror films, and those films have got, they're probably through the kind of biggest horror films ever. Yeah. So, then they've inspired countless spin-offs and ideas, so his legend will live on more than, as I said, more than him. The town, apparently when he died, they were like, okay, yeah, because he wasn't always in the news, he haunted them and haunted the kind of the town a bit, but I think they went on to kind of move on from it. And when he died, he's like, okay, yeah, Ed's dead. That's the end of that then.
Yeah. And if the house was still standing, I would imagine it would still be a tourist hotspot to this day.
Yeah.
all in all, two murders confirmed. You know, that count could still, you know, it's all that conjecture. It could be massively higher. 10 corpses mutilated from dug up graves. And, you know, he's presumed to have also had potentially killed his own brother as well.
Yeah. So that is the case of Ed Gein, Butcher of Plainfield. And yeah, I completely understand why he's inspired so many horror films, because it is truly harrowing.
It is one that we've wanted to cover for a while. Again, he was one of those ones kind of vying for a place in season 1 and season 2, but he's found his home in season 3. Let's just hope nobody burns it down.
Better kissed Ed Gein.
No, I was throwing a cigarette.
To end the episode, obviously, we'd like to end on a slightly lighter note, to leave you with a slightly nicer image. There's a song that's inspired by Ed Gein by Blind Melon, a song called Skinned, which is actually quite an alright tune.
Yeah.
An alright tune.
I'll make a shoehorn out of your shin. I'll make a lampshade of durable skin.
We can do our looky-likeys, because we like to do our looky-likeys.
Yeah, we're saving them.
I'm confident with this.
You're confident with this one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want to go first?
Well, I've got 2 of them. I've obviously mentioned my likeness to the Waterboys story in some aspects, which I'm sticking with, and I feel pretty happy about that one.
Okay.
My first lookalike is a young, and this actually is from my dad.
Okay.
So my dad sent this in. All the best to the boys.
Yep.
Love the show. Ben's great.
He didn't say it. I'm out of the show, I'm your favourite, your dad. 100%, Kev.
He believes that Ed Gein is a lookalike of a young Wilfred Bramble, a.k.a. Steptoe, out of Steptoe and Son. And when you Google this, it's very good. It's a good shout out from Dad.
Okay, I'm going to see it when I edit it.
Yeah, lovely.
So I'll do 2 reactions. Oh, that was spot on. And the other one, I go, well, I'm not sure, actually. So we'll see which one I go for. Well, I'm not sure, actually.
And my one is Mr. R.L. Ermey, who is the drill sergeant from Full Metal Jacket. And he actually is in one of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies. He plays a police officer. Get very Ed Gein vibes from him.
So I don't know if either of those were good, but let us know in the comments if you think whose was better, Papa Carter or Son Carter there. Let us know in the comments below. Mine is Christoph Waltz.
Oh.
That's a bingo. I think actually more him in real life with shorter hair. He's got the same kind of chin and shaped face. If you enjoyed the episode, please don't forget to give us a like and a comment, and subscribe. Or if you're listening to us on audio, give us a follow on one of those accounts. Follow our socials. We've got Facebook now as well.
We also have a library of episodes over on our Patreon site, which is patreon.com/couldmurderapod. Any support on Patreon would be massively welcome, and that obviously gets fully reinvested into the product itself. We've got some fun episodes over there, some not so fun ones, but in a good way.
Yeah, there's plenty of minisodes on there of smaller cases, and we tend to be a bit more out there with those ones because they're smaller and they're not as all as encompassing as these. We also have a new store with our merch, with a new merch, so go check it out if you're interested in any merch. Other than that, thanks for listening, thanks for support, and until next time, as we always say,
we say it loads just now.
Keep doing
what you do.
What you do,
doing.
As long as it's not digging up
corpses
and trying to make a woman's suit.
Nipple belt.
Bye.
See ya.